Welcome back to the third part of what elite college freshmen and recently tenured professors should really be seeking in college. If you haven't seen part 1 and 2, I highly recommend that you go back and watch those first because all of the things that we're going to be talking about in this part is built on the foundation. If you don't remember, in part 1, we really dived into the principles of what students and recently tenured faculty should be focusing on inside of college. The reason that we're jumping into this is these 4 years for students and for professors, if you're teaching to students for these 4 years, are the best opportunity for you to grow into the person that you were meant to be. And right now, a lot of what we think we should be seeking in college, while valid and valuable to some degree, is not what we should really be seeking. That's what we're diving into in this series, the meta level of what is the most valuable things that you can be doing right now inside of college. Why are we doing this now? Because the education system as a whole in higher ed is being questioned more than ever as the MAGA movement defunds education and AI continues to expand in its ability, sometimes teaching better than actual teachers do. So we need to show the power of education. In the first part of the series, we really focused on the high-level principles, building knowledge, love, and consciousness. In essence, pursuing spirituality. We talked about building critical thinking skills and making sure that we don't just help ourselves, but also disadvantage students and navigate systemic inequities. We talked about mastering friendships in the second part. Building wisdom in the first part as well. Mastering friendships in the second part, and more into how to build self-regulation and intrinsic motivation, as well as how to build an essence of subject matter knowledge and what we should really be teaching inside of college in the first place. That was a little bit more practical. Now we're going to get even more practical, adding on to the practicality of the second part with these last 3 golden principles of what we should really be seeking in college. Are you ready? These are the last 3 golden principles of the 10. I'm really excited. I've been thinking a lot about how to talk about these and what is most valuable to put here. So let's get started with golden principle number 8. Learn to consciously accomplish, or as I like to call it, conscious college accomplishment. Let me start with a little story from my own life. You've heard a bit of my story throughout this series, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that story means in regards to conscious college accomplishment. So for most of my life, I've treated accomplishment and spirituality like a poetry major treats a frat house. Completely separate. And this did not work out well for me. When I was in high school, I was a huge overachiever, tracked grades down like I was a missile tracking its target, doing whatever I could. I would slap extracurriculars onto my resume like a kid in a candy store. This worked to get me into Cornell. When I got into Cornell, I continued this comparison grade game until I realized that Jasmine from next door, dorm over, had already, at 18 years of age, sold her 5th business for about $373,000, had just started her quadruple major, and was now going to take all of the funds that she got from selling her 5th business and donate them to a small, remote village in the Congo for education reform. Now, obviously I'm joking about that Jasmine story, but the point that I'm trying to give is when I came to college, the comparison gap was insane. So I made the only reasonable decision I could. I gave up. I stopped pursuing the grade game and started pursuing the non-traditional content creator game. My goal was to become financially free so that I could do whatever I wanted, when I wanted, with who I wanted, where I wanted, how I wanted. I thought this would finally make me happy, fulfilled, and help me do some better things in the world. It was a little more aspirational, my goals at this point. Now, it totally worked! I'm just kidding. I ended up spending 2 years very lonely in college from being in these two different worlds that rarely mix together. And I bashed my head against the wall to try and get this content creation thing to actually work out. And I came to a fundamental insight in regards to this, which is success, as it's traditionally thought about, does not lead to fulfillment, happiness, and a better world. I don't just mean monetary success. I mean even success in pursuing financial freedom, or, and here's where it gets really trippy, defining success as being happy and being fulfilled. These are also traps. I started to get more into spirituality because of this realization. I began meditating for about 10 minutes a day, journaling sometimes, but never more than 10 minutes because accomplishment was still my end goal. And if spirituality got in the way of that, then that was a problem. Spirituality was my broccoli on the side of the accomplishment productivity game that I was playing. This also did not work out. I ended up almost losing my first girlfriend because she said I was too busy for her. And she was right. I was too busy. I was focusing too much on productivity over spirituality. And I came to a revelation, which is spirituality and accomplishment are not separate. Spirituality is, the accomplishment is the garden, and spirituality is the sun, water, and soil that you grow your accomplishments in. They are fundamentally interconnected and actually feed into each other. And what I want you to realize as a college student in an elite college who really values accomplishment is that separating these two things is the main reason that we have all suffered as much as we have in our lives. And I want to show you the beauty that conscious college accomplishment can have on helping you pursue everything we've been talking about while becoming happy, fulfilled, and actually doing better things in the world and feeding back into your accomplishments. It sounds too good to be true. And that's because it is. It's really hard to do this right. Because of that, I want to tell you some of the traps that I fell into and how you can avoid them throughout this whole description of what conscious college accomplishment is. Now, before we get into what conscious college accomplishment is, I'm going to be saying that a lot, by the way. I'm so sorry. Let's talk about 3 challenges that students have when it comes to connecting accomplishments and spirituality. I've gotten these from the 100 plus freshman students that I've talked to over the last few years. So I want you to see where you fall into these challenges. The first challenge is that we often see spirituality and accomplishment as disconnected. We think that spirituality is something monks do on a mountain, and they meditate so well that they dissolve and drift into the clouds to meet with eternal bliss. Or we think about it as something that we do when we're in the forest or isolated from our phone, whatnot. What if spirituality was actually able to be done and done more effectively when you see all your fellow students studying in the library at 3 a.m. after drinking their 5th cup of coffee, caramel macchiato, stressed about an exam that they have to do the next day, a chemistry exam, or a law paper that they need to write, or a club application that they need to fill out, or schedule something on their Google Calendar for an interview. What if that is the most valuable place to practice spirituality? Because spirituality is all about navigating, becoming aware of how we relate to the world, and then trying to become more healthy in that relationship. And what better way to do that than to use our very accomplishment pursuits, which will make us triggered the most out of anything, to become aware of our relationship to the world. They are not disconnected. They are fundamentally connected to each other. The second challenge that a lot of people that I've talked to face is that they fear spirituality will lessen their ambition, their desires, their emotion. And this comes from a misconception about what spirituality means. A lot of people think letting go in spirituality means not feeling anything, not pursuing as difficultly or as avidly in your actual life. This is not what letting go means. Letting go is like holding a bird. You hold the bird carefully. You see that it's there. You take care of it. But you don't squeeze it too hard. You don't cling to it. That is what letting go means. You can feel all of your ambitions, all of your desires, all of your emotions, but you do not cling to them. You do not become them. You do not blend with them. That is what it means to let go. So you can have ambitions, you can have desires, you can have emotions, but you never let your awareness, founding everything, as we've talked about in previous parts, become those ambitions, those emotions, those desires. Because as soon as you do that, then you cannot have a view from the outside on how to react, how to do. Ultimately, the main path of spirituality when it comes to accomplishment is all about pursuing accomplishment and then letting go of the outcome, of the attachments, the desires, and the emotions that you have. Still able to feel them, but not becoming them. And you will find that you will actually be able to feel deeper. You will be able to pursue ambitions deeper and pursue your desires deeper when you don't become them. It is exactly the opposite of what you think. You won't lose your ability to feel. You'll feel more beautifully than ever, and it will be even better because you don't let yourself be consumed by those feelings. That is an art. Now, the third challenge that a lot of students face is they see accomplishments as primarily an external challenge. Makes sense when you think about it. If we're going to be pursuing accomplishments, we have to do them in the external world, after all, right? But what if your relationship to the external world is actually what is affecting how well you're able to affect the external world? You see, nothing in the external world is unconnected to our internal relationship to it. That's what we've talked about in previous parts. And so when we think that accomplishment is primarily an external game, we pursue our accomplishments through acting, through changing our habits, through changing who we're seeing in relationships. But if we don't root that in internal change, it doesn't matter what we do in the external world. Our relationship to that thing will always be the same. It doesn't mean that external change is not valuable for pursuing accomplishments. It's necessary, actually. And sometimes you do need to meet your survival needs or change your relationships or change your habits in order to be able to pursue the spiritual path better. It's hard to practice spirituality when you haven't met your survival needs yet. So I'm not telling you don't work in the external world. I'm telling you realize that ultimately your relationship to the external world is what founds your power in being able to change it. And that's what we're trying to do with conscious college accomplishment. So, with that being said, what actually is conscious college accomplishment? You've heard me talk about it for a little with the challenges. Let me give you a very concise definition. I think you'll recognize this. Conscious college accomplishment is the art of using your pursuing of accomplishments to grow your knowledge, love, and consciousness in order to better pursue your accomplishments. You see how that's a loop? See how this connects everything we've been talking about in all three parts. It's all coming together. This is profound. This is incredible. This is the gold, right? I want to give you a metaphor to understand really what conscious college accomplishment is about. That metaphor, I want you to imagine that your pursuit of accomplishments is like a river. As you flow down the river in your pursuit of accomplishments, various obstacles get in the way. Obstacles like sticks and rocks, and especially big boulders. Those obstacles are patterns of negative internal relationship with the world. And ultimately, it's these obstacles that are actually blocking you from being able to flow through the accomplishment river as effectively as you could. What are some of those patterns of obstacles that you might be facing? Let me just read through a list and see if you can find yourself inside of these patterns, because these describe most of the patterns that you might be experiencing. Self-doubt, imposter syndrome, perfectionism, overthinking, comparison, control obsession, anxiety, fear of failure, fear of success, loneliness, shame, restlessness, toxic productivity, procrastination, busyness addiction, all or nothing thinking, disconnection from the body, people pleasing, performative empathy, over-reliance on external validation, boundary collapse, jealousy, and comparison. That was just a short list of some of the obstacles that you might face. In this list, I have struggled immensely with loneliness, jealousy, self-doubt, judgment throughout my life. Now, I want you to start thinking about how you can become aware of these obstacles. One of the most powerful methods that I've found is an awareness log, which is simply a place anywhere. Could be a book, could be a computer note that you use, all about writing down the patterns of obstacles that you face. Whenever you're going about your day and you notice a moment of resistance, of when one of these obstacles is conflicting with your ability to pursue accomplishments, write it down in your awareness log. This will give you an incredible power over what those obstacles are that are making you struggle in pursuing your accomplishments. And once you're aware, that's when you have the power to change and influence your relationship. Ultimately, influencing is all about what I call re-soiling. Imagine that you're taking the obstacles that you're navigating and re-soiling them into the very soil of the river that you're flowing through in conscious college accomplishment. That re-soiling could be kindness, love, curiosity, wonder, whatever feeling you want to re-soil those obstacles as is how you start to navigate these obstacles. I'm not going to give you any specific techniques for doing that. There's tons of techniques out there with other videos on them, which I might create videos on in the future. But there's meditation, there's contemplation, internal family systems, repatterning, self-repatterning, lots of different ways that you can take these obstacles and re-soil them, right? But the principle comes down to re-soiling. And you might not be able to re-soil right away. I don't want you to have a relationship with these obstacles as completely negative. They are trying to tell you something because these obstacles, they're there for a reason. It's not like they popped out of thin air and they're just really annoying, trying to stop you from being able to pursue your accomplishments. No, these obstacles formed because at a previous point, when you were in your river of accomplishment, they actually helped you in the context that you were in. And so sometimes these obstacles should not be getting rid of. And yourself, remember, I mean self with a capital S here, as we talked about earlier, the fundamental awareness behind everything, will know the difference between the obstacles that should be resoiled now and should be waited for. We'll get a little bit more into intuition and how to tell that a little bit later. But these obstacles are there for a reason. They're trying to tell you something. You're sad for a reason. You're angry for a reason. You are depressed. You desire this thing for a reason. You want to accomplish this thing for a reason. Do not think of positive and negative emotions as negative and positive objectively. It's all relative. They have profound wisdom that they're trying to tell you. So sometimes resoiling is just going to mean accepting that obstacle as it is in the moment and waiting until later. Then you can resoil it. I want to differentiate again, because it's important, between the self versus the ego as we think about resoiling. Remember, the ego is the identity that you think you are, the beliefs, the values, the behaviors that need to survive themselves in order to continue being alive. Because if they didn't, you would psychologically die. The self is the self with a capital S, the foundational awareness behind everything, the thing watching the movie screen. That has no beliefs, values, behaviors attached to it. It just is. It is the thing that is aware of my hand moving around the screen right now and of how your ego is reacting to it. That is the self. And that is what we're trying to tap into as we pursue this river of accomplishment. Because that is the thing that knows what we should resoil our obstacles into as we come across them. One of the stories for me realizing this, I've mentioned this a little earlier inside of this video, but it was when I was in my second year of college pursuing content creation to become financially free, really honing down into my note-taking course, Obsidian University, with my business partner, John. I was really focused on building this because I wanted to become financially free. I needed some way to get out of this situation. And this was the busiest time of my life. I was doing this course while doing 4 clubs at Cornell, while pursuing a full-time student course load, admittingly in psychology, not mechanical engineering. And then also posting regularly on my YouTube channel, my blog, and my newsletter, and my podcast all at the same time, and maintaining a girlfriend. Now, as I said, my girlfriend at some point said, "I feel like you're too busy for me," and I almost lost her. Now, we're not together anymore, but it was for different reasons. And I realized in that moment, because of this conscious college accomplishment and this awareness, what was really making me pursue this financial freedom. It wasn't necessarily the money. It was what the money meant for my identity, which was I felt incredibly lonely at Cornell because of these 2 different worlds I was in, content creation and student life. And I felt more at home in content creation. Becoming financially free literally meant being able to finally pursue the thing that actually made me feel alive, the thing that I felt was truly, authentically me, instead of being this mask of a student. And that was the root at what was making me behave, which I figured out because of my awareness log. And so then I resoiled that obstacle. Instead of a fear and inauthenticity of being a student and being chronically busy because of wanting to become financially free, I resoiled that obstacle into curiosity about what my student life could mean to me and how I could connect those lives more and how I could authentically create on YouTube instead of creating just to make money. Because even if I would make enough money from creating these note-taking courses, was I really helping the world by creating note-taking courses? Yeah, note-taking is valuable to some degree, but ultimately it's a method. It doesn't change the mindset through which you come to life. And I'm all about changing the mindsets, changing the meta. As we talked about in systems thinking, the most powerful way to change a system is to change the very way that it perceives itself. And you're a system. So if I can get you through these videos to change the way that you perceive yourself, that is the most powerful way that I can change education and change your life, hopefully. See how it goes? And that was all because of becoming aware through my awareness log. Now, at this point, we should talk about the difference between healthy ambition versus unhealthy ambition, and healthy desire versus unhealthy desire. Because it's one thing to talk about pursuing accomplishments mindfully. It's another to talk about what accomplishments do you pursue. Now, the difference is actually very simple. That doesn't mean it's easy to understand, but it's very simple. Easy to apply, but it's very simple to understand. Unhealthy ambition is fueled by fear, whereas healthy ambition is fueled by love. It sounds very airy-fairy. What I mean by that is that on the long-term scale of you thinking about why you're doing what you do, healthy ambition will be framed in a loving way. Even if the short-term ambition that you need to do in order to reach that long-term ambition is more fear-driven, long-term healthy ambition is framed lovingly. So for example, with my own accomplishment, on a shorter scale, yes, I do want to become financially free still. But it is not an unhealthy ambition because the reason that I want to become financially free is not out of fear. It is out of love. I want to be financially free so I can create stuff like this and not have to have any sponsorships or YouTube ads, which I don't have right now because I don't want to corrupt your mind as you're watching these videos. I want to be able to create whatever I want, however I want, in a way that's beneficial to the world without having to fear money. That is love-driven over the long term. The second to last thing about conscious college accomplishment that I want you to think about is flowing with the wisdom of life. We've talked a lot about pursuing conscious college accomplishment, but how do you know what to do on a day-to-day, a week-to-week, month-to-month? You see, once you get more into the spiritual path, you can't just follow your to-do list anymore or your routine because you realize that that fundamentally might be the obstacle keeping you from growth. What if you're trapped in your routine at college and you can't break out of it? You're too fearful of stepping out of your comfort zone. Or maybe it's the exact opposite and you're so exploratory, so wanting to experience everything that you never take the time to reflect and understand, what does this mean for my spiritual path? In order to navigate that, you need to be able to flow with the wisdom of life. Listen to what it is trying to tell you. There's a metaphor that you can use to understand this, which is imagine that your river of accomplishment is its own river. And there is a greater river representing all of life, which in a lot of spiritual traditions has been talked about. I think the most common that you might understand is the Tao, which translates to the way. The Tao is fundamentally ineffable. That's kind of the point. But you can think of it sort of as the wise connection between all past, present, and future states. You can flow with the Tao or against it. Flowing with the Tao means connecting your river of accomplishment to the greater river of life. Flowing against it means disconnecting from the Tao and ultimately conflicting with it throughout your entire journey. Ultimately, being able to flow with the Tao is going to supercharge your ability to accomplish well. Let me give you a story to understand the power of flowing with the wisdom of life rather than trying to fight it. I was in my last semester of Cornell just this last spring, and I was on the job search. Now, I was very anxious about the job search because I'd never done a job search before. Every single job that I've gotten from someone else giving it to me because they find me through my content, or spontaneously they reach out to me in some way. So I've never had to submit to a job. Added on to this, my parents both alluded to the fact that when I graduated, they were cutting the plug. Now, of course, they would still support me if I really needed it, but the implication was I really needed to figure out how to be independent. And so I was like, oh crap, if I don't do this job search well, not only am I going to disappoint my parents, but maybe I'll disappoint myself because I'm not as capable as I thought. So I started applying to jobs, and it was soul sucking. Oh my God. Tailoring my resume, writing a cover letter, submitting it to a job application platform, and being 95% sure that it was just going to be read by an AI and not even a human was awful. And after 5 job applications, I was already considering, well, maybe living out of a box isn't too bad. Maybe I should just become Socrates and walk around in a bathrobe and question everything instead of doing a job that makes me money. Then, one day, I had this incredible burst of light just erupt from my chest while I was laying on my bed. It was baffling how powerful it was. It was all calling me to do one thing, which is message Yukai Chow. Yukai was a really powerful and influential gamification business leader who I'd had on my podcast 3 years before to talk about actionable gamification. I had him on a few weeks before that in order to talk about his new book, 10,000 Hours of Play. I didn't think of anything of it when it happened, but my intuition was telling me, email him about a job offer. And when I'd followed my intuition in the past, it tended to do pretty good stuff. So I decided to take the advice, and I emailed him saying I could do 3 free things for him over a month. And if he liked my stuff after those 3, after that month, he could keep me on. And it worked. I'm still working at the Octalysis group full time outside of this Conscious College thing. And it is my dream job. Combines gamification, education with a whole bunch of really cool, competent people. Never would have happened had I not followed my intuition. And so what I'm trying to show you here is that a core part of pursuing the spiritual path and connecting with accomplishment is learning to flow with the wisdom of life, which fundamentally requires listening to your intuition. You may think you listen to intuition, but I'm really talking about a different sort of intuition, because there's 2 different types. There's listening to intuition from your ego, and there's listening to intuition from the self with a capital S. And they are very, very different. And here's the problem, is the ego will try and corrupt your perception of the intuition so that you think that's what you should do, when it is really just trying to survive itself. So understanding the core difference is crucial if you want to be able to flow with the wisdom of life. Thankfully, I've thought about the differences between an ego intuition and a self, and let me tell you them right now. Ego intuitions tend to be rationalizing. They come with logical justifications. You ever had an intuition and then it gets bursted with like 5 different rationalizations for why it's true? That's an ego intuition. They're highly head-based, right? You think about them, you rationalize them, logic, as we just said. And they're outcome obsessed. They're fear-driven instead of love-driven. And they're selfish. That's how you can tell an ego intuition. What about a self-intuition? Self-intuitions are often highly illogical. Sometimes they make no sense whatsoever. Like suddenly saying I should email you, Kai. Okay, I don't know why, but I guess I will. They're highly heart and gut based, emotionally charged. They feel powerful when they come. The burst of light coming from my chest when I was thinking of messaging you, Kai. They're process mindful. They're not just focused on the outcome, they're focused on the very process of doing a thing. They're love driven instead of fear driven, and they're selfless. As you think about this, I want to give one warning, which is firstly, listening to the self with a capital S and its intuitions can be very dangerous if you haven't done some of this work already, and if you're in a mentally unstable state. Because the ego is so good at corrupting self-intuitions, it can very easily trick you into doing some really bad stuff. So if you ever have an intuition that tells you to harm yourself or to harm someone else, most of the time you should really question that. And if you're mentally unstable, probably don't follow this advice until you're more out of that. Other people are going to give you better advice than yourself is in this state. So be mindful of that. The second thing is your intuition is not always going to tell you the thing that you should do right away. As we said, sometimes you need to accept what is going on in yourself and realize that maybe yourself isn't ready to give you the intuition for what you need to do. Maybe you need to think about it more in a rational way. Yes, maybe weigh the pros and cons. Have more experience in life, and then the intuition might come over time as your subconscious thinks about it in the background as you're doing all this stuff. So don't just think your intuition is going to be able to save you every single time. I recommend you start with smaller things to use your intuition on, and then move to the bigger, high-level, purpose-driven things after you've done a little bit of the small things. So that's intuition. I want to close this whole section on conscious college accomplishment, although we are going to talk about purpose in regards to this as well, with something that you should be very mindful of, because I was not. And it caused me a lot of suffering when I was going through this whole process. I wish someone had told me about this step in the conscious college accomplishment journey, because it would have saved a lot of pain in my life. And that is, when you're going through this conscious college accomplishment journey, you're going to experience what I call transformational conflict. This is when your spiritual growth causes new aspirations, goals, values, relationships, habits to start conflicting with old ones. I think we've talked about this a little in previous parts, but we're going to unpack it a little more here. This can be really scary because you really feel this conflict between what you know you could be and who you are right now. And you start to have two options, which is either you try and coalesce that previous self that you had into your new self, or you take the really difficult road, which is you let go of those previous values or relationships or whatnot. And that is really hard to know the difference between those two. Because ultimately, the vast majority of students right now, at least, I hope this changes, are not pursuing the spiritual path. And by going down this road, or this river, you will feel lonely at first. You will feel conflicted. Unfortunately, internal growth is not valued to the same degree in society. And when it is, it's more obvious, like emotional intelligence and how that helps you in the workplace. It's not questioning your very relationship with reality. And that is what we're trying to do here, is really go to the root meta issue. It's very hard to share that with people because most people are operating in this external relationship with reality. And so you will feel this transformational conflict at first. I felt it many times throughout my journey. And yet, when you reach the other side, it will be so joyous and profound because you will see that your relationships, your values, your accomplishments, they all have more meaning, more love associated, more power. You have more ambition and desire and emotions. And it's more visceral for you and beautiful because you don't cling to them, you don't blend with them. Just try and focus on getting to that other side of the transformational conflict. There will be periods where you're more conflict prone, where you veer back into the accomplishment external game that you've been playing, and periods where you veer back into the spiritual game. Recognize that that's all a process of change. Often we go through ego backlash as we change a lot because the ego does not want to die. It is scared of that. It has been trying to keep you from doing that its entire life. But ultimately, the world doesn't need perfect students, externally accomplished. It needs conscious ones. And I know you feel that quiet tug in your chest that this is the right path, that's your self-calling. Flow with it because it already knows the way. Let's talk more about purpose because that connects really integrally with everything that we've been saying about conscious college accomplishment. Let me start with what students say when they talk about purpose right now. Here are some direct quotes from conversations that I've had with freshmen. I'm taking things one day at a time before I figure out my purpose. I'm using the first semester to figure things out. I don't feel the need to think about purpose yet. College will help me figure out my life purpose. My advisors will help me figure that out. Of course, there are some students that are already thinking about purpose and different ways of thinking about it, as I just said. But there is a theme, even in the people pursuing purpose, that it's not something we need to think about until later on. College is for figuring out our purpose, not by us having to do it, but by just experiencing things. To some degree, of course, that's true. You'll learn more throughout college, and that will teach you more about your purpose. But there is a very insidious belief in thinking that we should offload that to college, take away responsibility from ourselves for doing it. There is incredible power when it comes to conscious college accomplishment, everything else we've said about what to seek in college, when you have a purpose defined. We're going to get into the why, talk about purpose, but first let's just define what it is so that we have something we're both know we're speaking about. I like to define purpose as an aliveness that you dance towards. I know, quite a little flamboyant way of defining it, but there's a reason that I call it that, and that is because it is something that doesn't unfold immediately, especially if you're a freshman college student. It's a dance where you experience more of college, and then that teaches you more about your purpose, and then knowing more about your purpose teaches you more about what you should experience and how to reflect on that. It's a dynamical relationship, like dancing with a partner. And why talk about this aliveness that you dance towards? Well, college won't do it for you. Unfortunately, there's no purpose class where we can talk about this directly. And there's often not discussion time set out for it in class. It's something that you do with your advisor or on your own. That's really unfortunate because purpose is one of the best filters for what you should say yes to. Think about it. When you say yes to an experience, how do you determine whether to say yes? Hopefully, you use your values to some degree, or an intuition if you've defined values. But the purpose is the best way to know whether to say yes to something. And notice that if you don't have a purpose defined, you're going to use whatever is left in order to figure out what to say yes, which might be, does it sound interesting? Would it be fun? Do I vibe with it? These are not good foundations off of which to say yes or no to something. So purpose is a fantastic way of knowing what to say yes to, because I know that my purpose is a mix between using motivation to make important things more enjoyable and enjoyable things more productive, like gamification. And I want to make college into a system that promotes knowledge, love, and consciousness, the spiritual path. I have so much more clarity over what to say yes to in my life. Maybe it doesn't need to be that specific for you. You'll learn this over time, but just having a general direction is really helpful. Because if you don't set your purpose, someone else is going to set it for you. You're going to be working for someone else and following their dreams instead of your own, which isn't necessarily bad if you do it consciously. I'm not saying working for someone else is negative. I do it. I ideally would like to be my own boss someday. But if you're doing it unconsciously, that's when it's negative. It also creates ethical guardrails for what you do and don't do. Now, I'm not saying if you didn't have a purpose, you would just be a scandalous, awful person. Oh, I'm just going to murder everyone. I'll do whatever I want. Obviously, there's principles people live by without having a purpose set. But it is going to set more guardrails and a little bit more airy-fairy stuff, the stuff that's on the line, which ultimately is the most important stuff anyways, because that's the stuff you need most clarity on. Like if you have a really strong purpose, for me, for example, I couldn't see myself working somewhere, especially because I have most of my survival needs met, where I feel like it's even not doing explicitly a lot of good in the world. Like if it's on the line or it's doing a little bit of good, I won't even work there because my purpose is too authentic and meaningful to me to do that. That's when purpose is really valuable. It guides what sticks out to you, what's relevant, right? There's infinite amount of things you could pay attention to on YouTube or on social media of some other sort. And having a strong purpose is like a lens through which to see the world, a one that you put on purposely, like these glasses. It illuminates to you what is important. It gives your intuition from all the conscious college accomplishment we just talked about, something to use as a guardrail, as a guidance. What else is your intuition going to use? It creates emotional stickiness, which makes you learn more effectively. There seems to be this belief, even unconsciously, that we've talked about earlier, that knowledge is more of a transfer thing rather than a relationship. But the emotions and relationship you have to learnings are the glue which make them stick. And so having a purpose makes those learnings stick out more to you and therefore actually makes you learn more effectively in college. So it's good for accomplishment too. And it finally gives you something to wake up to every single day. On those days when it's hard, when it feels like, God, there's 4 exams this next week. I can't do it. I just want to be home with my dog Tucker or my cat. This gives you something that gets you out of bed, that enlivens you. It's especially useful when the purpose is really, really out there, like big. Not necessarily that you know you can do it, but it's the huge visions that inspire you, not the visions on the day-to-day. Nothing inspires me about saying, oh, today I'm gonna, well, for example, record this video. I mean, it is inspiring to some degree. I love recording these videos for you guys. But in another sense, the higher order vision, which inspires me to get up and record this video, is knowing how in the long term, hopefully, it's going to help people, students, and professors pursue the spiritual path and therefore grow humanity and the universe. That inspires me to get out of bed. So now that we've talked about the why of purpose, let's go through some more principles of what purpose is and how to build it, using me as an example. One thing you should know about purpose is it unfolds in seasons and layers, which aren't themselves neutral. And the reason I say this is that there can be this trap that you fall into when thinking about purpose that is, well, I don't know what I like doing yet. I don't know what I'm skillful at. So I can't define my purpose right now. Or what if my purpose changes and now I'm betraying the original purpose? That does not respect the seasonality, the dance of purpose. the layering of purpose. You don't need to know perfectly what your purpose is. You can define something rough, use it as a guidance, and then iterate as new experience comes in. Just don't do what a lot of students do, especially if you're undecided, and have zero idea. Just say, oh, I'm kind of just trying to figure it out. That's not helpful for you. It's too vague. So be open to the seasonality of it. And remember, these aren't neutral seasons. It's a mistake to think, and from a meta perspective, this applies outside of purpose too. Don't think of neutrality or being in the golden mean, as Aristotle says, as being perfectly centered, as if there is a balance right here and you're always in the middle. That is actually a horrible spot to be, because middle or neutrality does not necessarily equate with truth. For example, maybe for my season in life, which is true actually right now, career is more important to me than anything else. That doesn't mean I don't value relationships right now, or that I don't value other things that I do. But for the season that I can sense I'm in, that is the most important aspect of my life. That I can follow neutrally or in the middle by not veering too far away from my values while I prioritize this thing. So even though my midpoint isn't necessarily in the middle, like I'm following career, relationships, my personal growth exactly like 33, 33, 33, I am prioritizing this season of career while still being mindful of how it balances with other stuff. And it might be the same thing for you. Maybe you're in a season of relationships like I got out of recently, and you're really focusing on building friendships or a romantic partner or your family relationships. Maybe that's what your purpose is telling you to do right now. Maybe your purpose is telling you to work on survival needs, because it's really hard to pursue spirituality when you haven't met those. Another principle of finding your purpose is, what can you not do? I like the negative way of saying this because it really forces you to think about what you really love doing. What, I was going to say turns you on, but that's probably not what we want to use. What really energizes you? Now, don't mistake this as being indicative of every single aspect of purpose. A lot of following your purpose is going to be very boring. And actually, that should be a signal to you that purpose is not always a fun, enjoyable thing. There's a lot of stuff I have to do for this Conscious College channel, which I don't find that enjoyable. Or maybe I find it enjoyable at first, but then it gets tedious over time. Like, for example, I love talking to freshmen. It's nice. I get to learn more about my audience. I feel connected. And yet at a certain point, it's very, okay, we're going to talk to more freshmen now. Okay, we're going to talk to, oh, I've heard that response before. Oh, I've heard that, right? It can get very tedious. And yet that boring work, quote unquote, is most important possible thing I could be doing for the channel. Because getting to know you all more, as well as professors, is going to make these videos so much more targeted and alive and resonant to the challenges that you're going through. Another question you can ask, what are your values? Do a values exercise. This will help you determine what actions embody those values. Ikigai is a pretty good purpose framework, although there are issues with it because it tends to be more aspirationally oriented instead of focusing on some of the survival needs you might have to meet. What are you good at, enjoy, and is good for the world? That combination of three things is really valuable. But again, sometimes working on your survival needs or stuff that you're not as good at and not as excited about is exactly what following your purpose in the moment needs for you to do. There's a really good book that I read which helps with some of these purpose defining steps. Ironically, from my boss now, Yu Kai, 10,000 Hours of Play. It's a book about how you can use the principles of defining a role-playing character in a video game as defining your real-life character to find your purpose. There's 6 different steps in order to do this. Defining your game, which is like your high-level mission statement for what you want to do in life. Your attributes, which are the characteristics inherent to you for what you're good at or weak in. Your role, which is like what role you tend to embody and find strength in embodying in life, you can kind of think of it as video game roles. Like, oh, I'm usually the wizard character. I play more of an intelligent backline role, or I'm a druid, or I'm a warrior. I really like being in the front lines, and I'm confident and I execute well. We have skill, which is the skills that you've built across your life, different from attributes in that you've built these. They aren't necessarily inherent to you. Like, I'm really good, I think, at speaking on camera. I think I come across naturally. I act as if there's someone in front of me. I really enjoy it. It's kind of an attribute as well. I've built my visual design skills. I've built my content creation skills for YouTube and my niching skills, my personal branding. These are all things I've built which help me do this. My teaching and learning skills, right? It all connects together. Then your alliance is the people in your life who help you pursue your purpose. This is also crucial to figuring out what your purpose is. What alliance do you have that would help you with a certain embodiment of your values and what you're good at and all the other things? And then quests are the concrete things you do on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month in order to pursue your purpose. So that's a pretty helpful framework for pursuing life purpose and defining what it is in the first place. The deeper you understand yourself, the deeper you'll be able to pursue your purpose. The initial definition of your purpose is just the starting point to be able to flesh it out more. And going back to transformational conflict, purpose could unfortunately mean losing friends, losing clubs, things that you enjoy doing, right? It could mean that, because as you pursue your purpose more and more, you'll realize some of the things that are in your life right now are not what you should actually be doing. And it might mean expanding or honing down on what you do. It's not always a pretty game pursuing your purpose. And that's something you're going to have to accept. But the beauty that you will find in flowing through the river with a purpose in mind is so much better than just going about it airy-fairy and saying, no, I'm just going to let college do it, or I'll just wait until I experience it more. This is something you have to do now, because otherwise you're going to be pursuing someone else's purpose. With that being said, let's move on to golden principle number 9. I'm really excited for this one. And that's because I've thought a lot about it. This is one of the ones I've experienced most lacking inside of college. And that is, we need to seek to prepare students for the outside world. With all this spiritual talk, you might have realized there needed to be some necessity to talk about really practical stuff like outside world. Are we preparing people for that in college? Our generation can sometimes be spoiled with pursuing gender studies majors or art majors. I'm not saying these majors in themselves are bad. I'm saying that we can get spoiled in the sense that we're in elite colleges, at least in the US, in this situation where we often haven't experienced as much of the world. We don't see how many people are still pursuing their survival needs, how difficult life can still be. And we get spoiled thinking, oh, I can just do what I want in college. I don't have to prepare for the outside world. I can use this as a way to explore myself, which you should do, of course. But at the same time, we can't be too airy-fairy about this. So a lot of this golden principle is in helping us build stuff for the outside world, which isn't built in college right now. Let's talk about a few of the things that we need to be helping build in school in regards to that. First is, and I've mentioned this before, but we're going to dive into it a little more, helping students become general specialists. There's a good book on this called Range by David Epstein. And it's all about the idea that as AI and the internet gets more prevalent and society continues to change really fast because of technology, the jobs that you think are relevant right now, you have no idea what could come out in the future. Is the mechanical engineering job that you're gunning for even going to exist 5 years from now? You can't know. What you can do is prepare for it by becoming a general specialist. Here's the reason being a general specialist is so valuable. AI right now is really good at specialization. but it sucks at general stuff, because in order to be a general problem solver, you need really good intelligence, consciousness. There's actually good arguments saying consciousness is in part an evolved mechanism for adapting to new problems and getting a higher order perspective on things. AI can't do that. It's not a general problem solver. So if you want to be able to learn to be in a world with AI, which you do, because it's not going away anytime soon, being general helps you do things that AI can't, but also being specialized in a few key areas helps you use AI to do those areas really well, because even when AI gets better than humans at doing some of these specialized tasks, it needs someone who can guide it. And by being specialized, you can be the guidance there. So general specialization makes you incredibly valuable. One of the questions you can ask yourself whenever you're thinking about what career you want to go down, this is a question I asked myself when getting into the Octalysis group, is what is the weirdest but most valuable mix of skills, attributes, roles, alliance, quests that I can combine for my specific purpose to make myself invaluable in whatever I'm going down? With Octalysis, I asked this question and I realized that there's a lot of people in the group that there's a need for people who are really good at emotional intelligence and leading things, while also being a visionary and having some in-depth knowledge about visual design, UI, UX. Because there's a lot of people that are really good at either of those, but not as much the mix between the two. And there's also not someone that's an expert in teaching and learning and can help the company itself become better versed in how to teach and how to learn effectively, so that we can remain the #1 gamification company in the world. Because if we don't keep learning, somebody else is going to and take us over. And so I filled myself into this niche, and I'm actively thinking about how to build those skills. Do the same for your career. How can you scope out what skills are typical, and then what can you add that's weird, that's spicy, that's unique to you, that will make you absolutely invaluable in that? Think about this when you're applying to jobs or when you're getting into a job. What are already people good at in the company? Where's the hole of gaping need? Fill that hole if it's resonant. Or even if it's not resonant, ask your intuition if that's the thing you should be doing at the time. Sometimes we can't do the stuff we want. Another thing that we need to help students do, and this is particularly important for professors to think about, is they need to learn to use AI. And I get it. I think we've discussed before how much we don't want students to replace the learning. And there's a lot of ambivalences to using AI, which we'll go into briefly. But they need to know how to use it. They need to, because they have to navigate the real world, which absolutely uses AI in most areas. I can tell you from my own brief experience in the working world and talking to others, almost everyone uses it. I know it has problems, which let's get into those now, and then try and see how we can navigate them in the classroom in order to make those ambivalences a little less. The first is we're scared it's going to replace thinking, which, of course, it will replace thinking if that's how students use it. But why are they using it like that? Goes back to the intrinsic motivation talk that we had. There's a scarce black hat left brain environment in a lot of classrooms right now. And that inherently pushes shallower level arcs of spiral knowing. Those shallower arcs incentivize using AI to replace thinking rather than learning. All the students I've talked to, one of the biggest things that they say about AI is that they know that it can hurt their learning, but most of the time when they use it to replace stuff, it's because there's a deadline right around the corner. And part of this is, of course, the student's responsibility to navigate, but it's also the systemic pressures making them have to do that. So that's one thing. Another way we can solve this is train it to be a Socratic dialoguer. Don't let the AI just replace the student's thinking by saying the answer straight away. Of course they're going to use it then. It's like, wow, I have this God in my pocket that can just answer anything I want. But if you train it in order to guide the student to the insight themselves, then it becomes really valuable. You might, as a professor, give a training script that students can use if they want to, or just have a class AI that somehow might be a little harder, but get the university to pay for, and then have everyone in class use that AI with that training in order to be the Socratic dialogue that you want. Train it to do all the other things that we've been talking about in terms of the golden principles. Have the AI question the student and how that's going. Imagine how powerful that would be. An AI that isn't just helping them do homework, but actually pushing them further into the principles that we're talking about. That's insane. Train it to give insight into the problems that students are going through in general. If you have a whole bunch of students using AI, and then you get them maybe every month to have the AI summarize what are the biggest struggles they're going through in the class, then you have them all submit that. You summarize that submissions into your own AI that summarizes the summarizations, and now you have a golden summarization of the biggest issues your students are facing right now in your class. That's incredibly valuable information for figuring out how to tailor the class in the future to navigate those issues. Another ambivalence is students will cheat. I get it. They will. But that's inevitable. Some students are going to do that. And one thing that we can do to try and navigate that is talk about cheating in your class, but also have students, if they're doing a really big assignment, submit a photo of the AI explaining how it was used for that assignment. Now, of course, students can still Photoshop or whatever in order to cheat even that. But can you really solve for that? Not every cheating can be found. And ultimately, it's the student's responsibility to see how they're negatively affecting their learning by doing that. They would have found a way anyway, even without AI. If you do end up catching them, don't punish them punitively. That's going to lead to resentment and ultimately indicative knowledge about representation of their actual knowledge, right? They might have known the material well and they just cheated. And have them be rehabilitated instead. Don't punish them as harshly as we do. There's some really harsh punishments in college for getting caught cheating. Sometimes it's a one and done deal. You get caught, you're gone. How is that helping anyone? Have them write an essay about the problems of cheating and how it affects your learning, and then submit that as an extra assignment, and then give them the points for that assignment. Imagine how much change that makes you go through. You have to write an essay talking about the problems of cheating when you cheated. That sparks growth instead of, okay, we're just going to have you get kicked out of college now. Now you don't even have an opportunity to change. Now, if they do it again, that's when we can have another conversation. But see how much more valuable that is for cheating. And then the last major ambivalence is it's unethical. I get it. I've had ambivalences about this too. It's trained on artists. It's trained in a way where it takes a lot of energy. Not as much energy as you might think. It's actually, compared to flights or the animal industry, it's really not that much. It'll be more in the future, yes. But ultimately, just like with many things in life, you have to work in the system itself in order to be able to change the system. So we might want to say, okay, we can't use AI because it's unethical. But AI is so powerful, so incredibly lucrative for your productivity and ability to do things that you are severely limiting yourself by not letting yourself use it, or your students. Encourage ethical use. Try and get them to use a model that is more mindful. Maybe it says its energy costs every time you use a chat, or it's not trained on artists without their consent. It might be hard to find, but they exist. I've used them before. And just encourage ethical use in your class. It's going to help the students in the long term change the system. Another thing that we need to be helping students for to prepare them in the outside world is cultivating an information diet. Now, let me give you a brief story in regards to this. I used to be really deep into the personal knowledge management community. I remember telling you about Obsidian note-taking beforehand. What personal knowledge management is the art of collecting, connecting, and creating out of the information you consume. This is a buzzword for most people because they don't even know at all what that means. And the reason is we don't teach information diets in college. We kind of assume, okay, information is like the thing that you consume to accomplish something. What I want you to see is that information diet, and this is what I realized in my PCAM era, even though I went too far into it, is just as important as what you physically consume. What you physically consume impacts the health of your body and, in turn, your mind. And what you informationally consume impacts the health of your mind and, in turn, your body. Full circle. So we need to focus on information diet. Your ideas come from the connections between what you consume. If you're only consuming physics content, you're only consuming psych content, you're only consuming chemistry content, that's what your ideas are going to be about. It's really that simple. So there's also benefits and drawbacks from consuming from different mediums of information. A lot of students don't realize that the medium of information itself is the message. This was an idea from Marshall McLuhan. The notion is that the medium changes your relationship to the information, even if the message is the same. Think about how insane that is. Let me give you an example. When the printing press came out, it completely changed society. Not just the information that we could put down, but the way we related to it. There's a huge difference between reading a book that was handwritten for you by someone versus reading a printed book that was mass distributed and given out. Different relationship. An even bigger different relationship between a book and a film and a podcast. They all have different benefits and drawbacks. And knowing those needs to be understood by students. Think about, for example, on a student perspective, what is the difference for you between watching a video like this, 3 hours long? I know it's crazy, but I'm glad that you're here. And 9 hours long if you look at all 3 parts. The reason it's so valuable, though, is think about the relationship difference you have to this information compared to a short form video, or even a 30-minute video or an hour-long video. The relationship difference that you have with this video, because it is 3 hours long, is fundamentally irreplaceable. And that's why my videos are this long. I've gotten lots of people saying, why do you make them this long? Students aren't going to watch this. I have faith in you. All right, if you've gotten this far in the series, you're going to do great things. And the reason I make them this long is because your relationship to it is so much more profound compared to if I said everything I'm saying in 10 minutes, you would watch it, you'd go about your day, and you'd never think about it again. I'm trying to build a connection with you here. I'm trying to re-soil the very way that you perceive the world. And I can't do that in a 5-minute podcast episode. So we need to be teaching students not only the differences between mediums, but also define what your information diet is. How do you want to differentiate it? How can you make it more healthy? That needs to be taught. We need to understand for the outside world interdisciplinary collaboration. Good story from my own life is with my YouTube editor. Before outsourcing my YouTube videos, I edited all my own videos. When I outsourced them, this made me so much more aware of how to give the videos in a way that would make it as easy as possible for my editor to edit, and also how to make him do it in the best way possible, how to give him creative freedom. I understood what he was going through. And it's the same in any other interdisciplinary art. If you are, for example, there's a joke that architects and engineers clash because architects are always the ones making the airy-fairy designs, and then the engineers are the ones that actually physically that's not going to work. And it's the same with my Octalysis work. We're the designers, then you have the developers on the other end, and the designers and the developers kind of hate each other. Not really, but it's a joking hate because the designers always make the design, and then they get annoyed that the developers just completely break it. And the developers are annoyed because the designers make the design and they have no appreciation for how it's actually developed. And it doesn't work, or it's unclear. Imagine how powerful it would be if you put both hats on. Sure, you can specialize in one, general specialization, but a designer that knows how the development process works, an engineer that knows how the architecture process works, a computer scientist, a software developer that knows how hardware development works, God, that's invaluable. Another thing that we need to be preparing students for is personal branding. Why? Well, it doesn't matter what you know if you can't sell that you know it. Unfortunately, this has been painful for me to become aware of, is you can know all these things, and if you just can't sell it well, nobody's going to come to you. It's the same with debate, actually. This has been really unfortunate for me to realize, but it's true. It matters less how good your argument is in a truth level and more how good you are at selling it. And this is fundamentally one of the things that made me veer a little bit farther and farther from debate. I'm not saying there aren't debate circles where this isn't the case, but overall, I noticed a lot of the emphasis on how good you were at selling the debate. Even if the judges didn't think they were doing that, they were, because it's impossible, almost impossible, unless you're deeply aware of your self-biases, which a lot of people aren't, to not have some sort of bias towards the argument based off of talking style, if it resonates with your own worldview, whatnot. So personal branding is the same. It also is important because it helps bring other people into your life mission. It builds a serendipity vehicle. This is a concept from David Perel online. By creating different content, building a personal brand, you create basically a huge leaf, a web of luck that attracts opportunities to you like a magnet. And this is where I've gotten most of my jobs from, is just having people find my content. They email me saying that they want me to work for them, and then I work for them. And it could be the same for you. I'm not saying you have to start a huge content creation machine like I have, but what does personal branding could mean? Could mean making a website with some portfolio projects. Do that now instead of waiting until 5 years from now and not having all the serendipity luck benefits of doing it. Creating a portfolio which sells a story, skills, and is simple. I'm really emphasizing the simple story part. A lot of people think the point of a portfolio is just to showcase your skills. Keep in mind, the people looking at this portfolio page are probably looking at a whole bunch of others. They don't want to just read boring stuff. They want to be engaged emotionally, even if they aren't conscious of that. Make your portfolio engaging. I can't go all into that here, but it's a good principle. Understand niching. I've had this problem so many times, even with my own content creation, but with talking to other people, is they think, oh, Aiden, I've never been in a specific niche before, so I need to start broad and then narrow down so that I can figure out what I want to do. Exact opposite. If you want to attract people to you, we tend to be scared because of self-doubt or illusions of grandeur or whatnot. Some things I've faced especially. We're like, oh, I need to go broad so I can affect more people. And yet by going broad, you affect less because nobody is emotionally impacted by your offer. And ultimately, this is one of the reasons I started niching into elite college freshmen and recently tenured professors. Even I could still go more niche. I could say elite college freshman psych students, like I was. But even that would be a little too niche for me. But this was really hard for me to realize because I used to want to be so broad. And it's the same with your professional career. If you're going into law, what type of law? Don't just say I'm going into law on your LinkedIn. Choose something, anything. Even if you don't know, choose something and then veer out later. Don't start broad and then just say, oh, I'm just going to let the gods tell me what to do. That is not going to work. Also, understanding storytelling, how to talk about your personal narrative. Notice how in every single one of these parts, I've been giving stories from my own life. Why? Because they're engaging, they're emotional. They make you resonate and put yourself in my shoes with the points I'm making. If I just told you the points and I gave nothing else, you would not relate to them in the same way. It wouldn't be as powerful. That's all about personal branding. Another thing that we need to teach is career scoping. I don't mean how much money a career makes, but what you should be doing, what a career in that, what a job in that career is doing on a day-to-day. This is something a lot of people, they actually don't know. They go like, I'm going to be a doctor, a neurosurgeon, a content creator, whatnot. But do you know what is happening on a day-to-day with that job? Is that something that you would enjoy doing, find meaning in. For example, talk to a lot of doctors who think that, or not doctors, but pre-med students who think that being a doctor means, okay, you're doing a lot of surgery, you're helping a lot of patients, you're talking to them. No, 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 no. Yes, you're doing some of that, but there's a lot of paperwork, right? Like prescribing things, filing out insurance documents, a lot of stuff like that. And so, can you do that? Can you see yourself doing that? This is work that you need to do before going into the career or while doing it, instead of doing all this work and then realizing the career doesn't resonate with you at all. It's very important. Another thing we need to be teaching, this is a big one, is conscious networking. If you're into spirituality, and you are, because you're a part 3 of this series, there's a mindset shift which you might have initial gut reaction when you hear networking, which is something I did as well for a while. That is, it feels very ugly. It feels very transactional. Like, oh, networking kind of sounds like doing your taxes. And what the mindset shift I want you to give, which is what conscious networking all is about, is treating your networking more as friendship networking and less as transactional networking. And I'm not saying they're the same thing. Of course, there is a difference between a friendship and a network relationship. Obviously, generally, a network relationship has a bit more of a transactional nature to it. But what I'm saying is the mindset of a friendship in regards to your networking will help it feel not only more alive, but actually work out better for you, like it has for me. Let me give you some mindsets that come along with that for conscious networking. Give, and you will get. It's deeply paradoxical. Giving more actually gets you more. This was surprising for me when I was doing my networking. I was like, no way. Like, this seems like airy-fairy cliche advice. If I'm always giving, how am I going to have the time to get stuff or ask for stuff? And yet what you'll find is the more that you figure out what someone's problem is and then help them with it, they naturally want to help you with yours. And they'll be much more willing than if you immediately come to them with a problem without having done anything else. So my personal process for conscious networking is right after seeing someone at an event, which I go to, which filters for the type of people that resonate for me. I don't just go to any networking event. I will get their phone number, get whatever social media they have, and I'll remessage them right after the event, saying we should get on a chat or we should have coffee or whatnot. If they don't respond, I respond 2 more times, asking them if they want to do that over 2 weeks. We have the deep-seated fear that, oh, they don't want to be bothered. Or what if they ignore me because, they hated my dress when I showed up that day, or they hated my suit, or I had a booger on my nose, and now, or they just hate me in general. I can guarantee you 99.9% of whatever reason you come up with, they don't feel. It's almost always they're busy. And I've never, ever responded twice to someone after they don't respond and gotten a bad response back. I'm sure it can happen. Maybe it'll happen to you, but it's very unlikely, is what I'm trying to say. Then, when you're on that call, find out what problems they're having. What are their challenges? What is their purpose? Help them with those problems in some way. Give them a resource. Offer to do something for them. Whatever. Do it for free. You will be astounded at the results that you get from this. Treat it more like a friendship. This is what you do with your friends. You don't ask for money. In fact, they would be like, what the hell? If you asked them to give you money, or you to give them to give you money for doing something. They would be like, well, screw you too. And then every quarter, try and reach out to your network just to say hi. Update them what you've been doing. Personalize the email a little so it doesn't look like AI. Maybe you still use AI and you just personalize it so it doesn't still. Don't worry, we all do it. And then say hi. And if this small touch will keep them thinking about you, build that serendipity vehicle. So that's some more about conscious networking. Another thing that we should do is connect learnings to practical real-world applications like the community or the workplace. It's a tragedy that there are students all across elite colleges that are doing so much value, so much work, so much incredible thinking is being put into projects or problem sets or discussions or whatnot. And it's not being applied into the community they're in. Imagine how different of a relationship you'd have with your learning, how much more meaning and also how much more alive you would feel if your projects were connected somehow to the community or the workplace around you. I'm not saying everything needs to be, but I had some classes where they would do this. Like my education classes, for example. Oh my God, they were really good. Every single education class I took at Cornell, we actually taught at a school or an adult at Cornell. For example, I taught a janitor at Cornell meditation techniques. I went to BOCES and I taught habit change and the science of learning. I went to the Ithaca High School and I taught college prep and English. I assisted in teaching that. That was so valuable. I felt so connected to what I was doing, and I actually had a place to apply the stuff to. It was great. We should do this not just in education, in other classes too. We should also teach the science of self-learning. You don't stop learning after you get out of college. We're going to have to keep doing it. We've talked a lot about that, so we'll move on to the next one. Everything about intrinsic motivation and self-regulation and conscious relationships and EQ we need to teach and to prepare for the outside world. You've heard it. EQ matters more for success than IQ. There's a reason for that. It's incredibly valuable. It goes back to personal branding, to be able to sell yourself, to be able to consciously network, to be able to see the emotions that are leading people to do the things they're doing rather than the rational thinking. We should teach how to do taxes. I almost didn't know I had to do taxes the first year I had to do them. I remember it really funny because I was talking with my dad around like January, February. And he was like, son, do you think you have to do taxes this year? And I was like, I don't know. And then we searched it up. Turns out you have to, in New York, do taxes if you make more than $12,500 in a year. So I was like, I haven't made that much. And I checked, I had everything up. And I kid you not, I had just made like literally just a bit over that. And I was like, shit, I got to do taxes. And it sucked because I never got taught how to do it. I used TurboTax and it did it, helped me do it for me, but it still took like 4 or 5 hours of like just awful, soulless work. And I'm not saying like aspirationally putting my taxes in felt good about. I believe in taxation. And it would have been so much easier if I'd been taught it to some degree in school. But we don't teach these things. And I don't want you to run into the situation I almost had where you get to the end of tax season, the IRA comes to you, and they're like, what? Why didn't you do your taxes? And you're like, well, I didn't know. I had to do them. Don't be in that situation. It's unfortunate. The last and one of the most important things that we need to prepare students for the outside world, which is inexcusable that we don't teach this. Again, I'm not blaming you professors. It's the system. It's the problem. But we have a responsibility to change it. Is about financial freedom and wage entrapment. What is wage entrapment? Wage entrapment is the culture that we are in economically where people currently in our capitalist society, I know it sounds very cliche and joking, we have to trade our time and energy for survival. If you did not work, you would literally not be able to survive in our current capitalist society. I'm not saying we should get rid of capitalism. I'm not going to make this political. We'll have a political video in regards to college at some point, but that's the reality of the situation. Most people are in a relationship with work where they need to work in order to survive. And think about how insane that is. Like just think about the fact that we need to do that. It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. It's like you only deserve to live as a human being if you work in order to survive. I'm not saying that we should have a society where nobody works. That's also a bad idea. But you have to trade your time and energy in order to survive. And the fact that we don't really get taught, like it's kind of known this subconsciously in college, but you don't realize once you exit into the adult world, it's like scary out there in the fact that if you're not working and you don't have that much emergency savings, let's hope you have parents that are willing to support you. Because if you don't, you just kind of have to do a job. You get forced into the next job that you find. You don't have the luxury of 6 months of emergency funds or parents helping you to find a job you actually care about. You have to, from survival, work. And we're not taught this. We're not prepared for it. We're not shown how to think about building passive income or thinking about what does it mean to build a career where we're not beholden and forced by wage entrapment. We should be taught things like Nathan Barry's Ladders of Wealth Creation. There's a really good article that describes the different leverage points for building wealth. And at the bottom is what you would expect. It's what most people are in, which is trading time for money. We don't even see this, a lot of people, as a ladder of wealth because it's just kind of the norm. It's what you expect. You go into a career, you trade time for money. That's a deeply unfortunate situation to be in if you're not okay with it, right? I'm saying if that's exactly what you want to do, go for it. I could never do it. I want to be in a situation where I'm not beholden to trade my time in order to survive, because then I can't create what I want to. I can't make these videos as easily because I still have to work outside of this. And the higher levels of ladders of wealth creation help you get out of that situation. There's trading your an offer for higher and higher levels of money. For example, a personal coaching business or a course. A course is actually different. I should have specified the next ladder after trading. I shouldn't have said trading time for money. The next ladder is like trading a result for money. So for example, maybe you build something for someone or you edit something. And then you say, you're going to pay me this for the project. That's a higher leverage because now your time isn't the thing bottlenecking you. It's just how good are you at the thing. Then you could negotiate a percentage allocation of whatever it is that you're doing work for. And now that's really valuable because now the incentives are aligned. If you help the thing that your person you're working for, the business you're working for do better, you also do better. So you don't have an incentive to lie about the amount of hours you work. You have an incentive to work less and have more value because that'll give you more money. Then there's really high level stuff like selling a product. Now, if you sell a product like a course, your time is no longer connected to that. If there's no upkeep, that is. It's just how much is your reach and do you have a good enough offer? I've made a lot of passive income from courses, but not enough to be fully financially independent. It's a higher level of ladder of wealth. Now you're no longer trading time for money. And then lastly, you have software like apps. These are things that can reach huge amounts of people and cause just cataclysmic amounts of wealth creation. Now, I'm not saying it's good that we can make that much wealth off of those things for one person at least, but that's the highest ladder of wealth, is like redefining the economic landscape with something like Amazon or Tesla or Uber in an app form or a website form, and having it spread to just the whole fabric of society. We should get taught the value equation inside of school. Value in $100 million offers by Alex Hormozi is defined as the perceived worth of the thing times the expectation of success, percentage of success, divided by time and effort. It's a very simple equation, but it's super valuable when you think about it. Think about what it would be like to use the value equation to define your unique offer in your career or your job description on LinkedIn or whatever. This needs to be talked about, because if it's not talked about, you're going to exit out into the real world and you're going to be baffled at how difficult it is to survive currently without trading your time for your money. And if that's not a situation that you want to be in, or even if it's a situation you want to be in and you just want to do it more mindfully, we need to think about, how do you make yourself invaluable? How do you stop just trading time for money? Or if you want to trade time for money, how do you make yourself so invaluable that maybe you have less risk of being fired, or your time is worth more money, Or you can negotiate one of those other offers that isn't just time for money, but maybe percent allocation or project overall is what you get money for. That's really valuable, because otherwise you're going to be stuck. You're going to be stuck like I still am. Thankfully, I've thought a lot about this, but I'm still trying to get out. Hopefully you'll be able to be on that journey with me as I try to get out of this situation. The last golden principle, we have been taking a long journey to get here, but we're finally here. And just because it's the last one does not mean it's not very important. So take this last one with stride. Let's finish out the whole 3-part series strong. The 10th golden principle of what you should really be seeking in college is building collaborative skills. One of the stories that really encapsulates this for me is going on my Octalysis annual retreat. This was a retreat with my whole 14-person remote team a few weeks ago. And it was really done beautifully, very smartly in terms of collaborative intelligence. You see, before the annual retreat happened 3 months before, not 4, I don't know what I'm doing, 3 months, we were given a mission. We're trying to improve internal engagement at Octalysis. So we were split into 3 different groups, all with a different leader. I was a leader for one of them. They had different leaders, all about trying to build a solution to the internal engagement problems that we were experiencing inside of Octalysis. We weren't really technically competing with each other, but we were slightly competing to create a solution. So for 3 months, we worked on this before the annual retreat, and the competition was tense. Not like really, but it was so fun. Everyone was sneakily talking about what they were doing behind each other's backs and on meetings with everyone. Sometimes we would say little hints of what we were doing, but not give the full picture. When we actually showed up to the annual retreat, our boss said this was the most energy they'd ever seen for an annual retreat in all 10 years of having the company exist. And then at the annual retreat itself, we showed all of our designs in 3 different presentations, chose one. We were so close. It was almost ours, 1 vote off, but Team B was chosen. And then we used that as a baseline and converged all the other best ideas from the different teams into that design. And now I'm on the team to try and develop that. So that was a really good example of collaborative skills. But there's often a lot of problems in school or college with collaborative work. And this is really unfortunate because the power of collaborative working is insane when you actually have people that know what they're doing, that can work well together, and know the meta principles, because we're always trying to go meta, of how collaborative work works well. You can't solve everything on your own. Unfortunately, I've tried, but I know at this point in my life, I need to collaborate in order to make my visions come to reality. And you do too. But students don't often ask what the meta skills of collaboration they should be building, or teachers, professors don't ask, how can I help my students build that? So what are the problems with current group work? And well, the first one I just mentioned is we don't ask the meta question. And what are those meta differences of group work versus individual work? One is we need to sell other people on our ideas. A huge issue is people don't realize that people don't speak in terms of solutions. They speak in terms of challenges connected to solutions. For example, with my spiral knowing theory, if I just told you about spiral knowing at the beginning of this whole series, without connecting it to any challenges that you're experiencing in your student life or your professor life, would you have listened to it? Now, maybe if you really love frameworks, you just love thinking, yes, you probably would have. But unless I connect it to challenges you're going through, like the perception that knowledge is transfer, not learning well enough, stuff like that, intrinsic motivation, then it doesn't connect. And it's the same with group work. We need to be able to sell our ideas to others in a group. And we often just think, oh, if I just sell the solution and I don't connect it to a challenge we're facing, then it'll be fun. That's unfortunately not how it works. There's lots of books out there on influence, making relationships in a team, etc. I won't talk about those here, but that's a meta idea. Another thing is we don't think about the process of working together. We think mostly on the outcome. Be the person in your group that goes meta. What is the meta process that is causing what is happening? For example, ask yourself when a group member isn't participating as much as they could be, instead of blaming them or not taking responsibility, ask, what's their exam schedule? Is their best friend visiting? Are they traveling in the future and they're thinking about that instead of this? Do they feel a lack of purpose in their life and therefore the group project isn't as motivating? Spend that time thinking about the process which led up to that outcome, because process can be used in future projects. Outcome, less transferable. Process is king. Be the person that thinks about the meta process of doing something. Another way this applies is, what is the best process to be using your group time for? A huge mistake is using group time for stuff that you could be doing individually, like reading a report and then brainstorming ideas on it. The brainstorming can be done individually and the reading beforehand, and then the group meeting is used for what the group meeting is valuable for, which is discussing the brainstorming. Now everyone's already thought individually, and you can pool your ideas and then come up with even more. Think about that all the time, the meta. Another issue is students don't think about group roles and ownership. I'm sure you've all experienced the situation where there's a new group project and everyone gets together in the group for the first time. And there's this sort of like cool period where everyone's like, okay, who's going to do it? Who's going to do it? Who's going to rise up and take the leadership position? The first person that does it, that's like the unspoken leader. Let's not make it unspoken. Let's really clearly talk about whose role is what in the project. And I encourage you to be the person that does this. I know you might not have a leadership persona, but if you don't start the norm, nobody else is going to. Even if you end up experimenting with it and it doesn't work out, we need ownership and roles, because ownership is what leads to things being done. It's what gives people intrinsic motivation for that thing. If the ownership is spread too wide, then nobody does it because there's no incentive for one person to do it. There's different types of leadership styles that you can pursue. I've learned a lot about this in my work at the Cornell Team and Leadership Center. There's generally like 3 different types, and they're all in a Venn diagram. There's the visionary, the executor, and the empath. It's pretty obvious what those are. I encourage you to try and be all 3 at the same time. Now, that's really hard, of course. It takes a lot of work to be able to do that. But a leader that can do all 3 of those is God tier. They're very rare. But when you have a leader that can do that, oh my God, that is incredible for group work. We also need to think about the motivation of other members. How can you connect your delegations, if you're the leader, or your communication in a way that motivates the other students? Understanding their cares, what part of the octalysis framework or self-determination theory or drive, as we talked about in part 2, is motivating them. How can we connect this to their life purpose? How can we give them a role or ownership that connects with what they want to do to improve in this project? Maybe they're skilled at something, but they don't want to do that thing because they want to grow in something they're not as good at. How can we unearth that and help them do that? Very important. How can you leverage people's knowledge, their skills, their alliances? Figure out what these are at the beginning of the project, and then think if there's any unique way that you can tie those in. Don't just immediately start in the group. Now, of course, if this is like a 5-minute, 20-minute activity, you don't need to go on a 30-minute rampage about everyone's skills and knowledge. But if this is a few weeks or months or even semester-long thing, do it. It's going to give so much value over the course of the project. Collectively, another issue is we don't think enough about the difference between divergence and convergence. These are 2 different parts of the creative process. Divergence is where we're still in the period of splitting off and coming up with new connections. You can think of it like brainstorming. Whereas convergence is where you bring those together and narrow in on focus. You can do this individually, but as a group, it's also really important to know which phase you're in. Because if you're clashing with the phase and what you should be doing, that can cause a lot of problems. For example, if you should be in a convergence period rather than divergence. It's my annual retreat project with octalysis. If we'd gone divergent mode after doing all 3 presentations and 3 months of divergence, imagine how negative that would be for the project timeline. We would have had way too many ideas and none of it would have ever gotten used, which is already what happened with the previous project because we'd done work on solving internal engagement a year before and it didn't get implemented because there was too many ideas and not enough thinking about the in-depth development of those ideas. So another huge issue, this is big, is not understanding collective ego. Collective ego, we've talked about individual ego, but when a whole bunch of individual egos connect together, they make a collective ego, which is different from the sum of the individual egos. And this collective ego also needs to survive itself and its identity. A good example is the scientific community. Now, I'm not ratting specifically on the scientific community. I'm just using it as an example because you probably are intimately aware with it. And that is, there's good parts of the collective ego and there's bad parts. The bad parts we'll focus on just because they're more illuminating of how collective ego can go wrong. And that is, let's say you're in STEM and you're a lab professor managing a lab. There is this culture of collective ego regarding research and publish or die and competing with each other for grants. Now, part of this is inevitable. It's just the system, which we can change, but it's what the system is right now. And this incentivizes a collective ego of surviving whatever identity it is that you have in your lab. Like, for example, if you're known for a specific result and you're at an elite college and you're now less incentivized because of the collective ego to explore into a really novel but probably wrong result. Because if it's wrong, that's going to affect your grant money and it's going to affect your ability to keep doing research. See how this affects the truth of your ability to seek truth. It hurts it sometimes. Sometimes it helps it. But collective ego affects us all, not just the scientific community. In group work, too. How do collective egos survive? They construct a personalized language. Collective egos of different nations. English, French, Spanish, Dutch. Just transparency. It's particularly true of some lower on spiral dynamics, which I won't explain what spiral dynamics here, but it's a theory of cultural evolution, which we'll definitely go into at some point. Lower spiral dynamics arcs, a lot of distransparency. Distransparency leads to corruption of collective ego, right? There's a reason that the US, it is illegal right now, as of recording this video, to record inside of a slaughterhouse because the collective ego needs to survive the ability to dispel all of this food, animal products, to the mass culture without them feeling bad about it. And if you could record freely in a slaughterhouse, it would be too damaging for the collective ego of all carnism, people that eat animals and animal products, to handle. And we'd probably have a lot more vegans or vegetarians or whatnot. The collective ego spreads itself to survive by talking. What I'm doing right now is in a form of spreading of ego. Hopefully I'm trying to connect you with yourself, capital S, but inevitably the ego does what the ego will do, and it will take what I say, turn it into its own, see it through its own glasses, and then use it to survive. I'm trying to teach you how to get through that. Collective egos build isolated boxes around in-group and out-group to survive. They build a narrative, an identity, and a history. Notice how your elite college is a collective ego. What's the narrative, history, and identity of that? They punish people going against the collective ego and people going with the collective ego. Collective egos refuse to self-reflect. Generally, this is more true of collective egos because individuals tend to be more developed. Anytime that you have a collective ego, it tends to be less self-reflective because it's kind of like the weakest chain link, the bottleneck theory of like the link is only as strong as a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. It's kind of same with the collective ego is, if the average person in a collective ego can actually be quite more developed than the collective ego itself. That's kind of trippy to think about. Collective ego can survive by resisting raising consciousness. This is why a lot of college doesn't have content like what I'm spreading right now. Because if it didn't, it wouldn't survive. It would change. That's what it means to survive. Do not change. Then there's creating dualities out of infinity. Right? My right hand, my left hand. Psychology, anthropology, STEM, humanities, creating dualities. There's differences in the scope of concern that collective egos have. Scope of concern might be your tribe, or your state, or your nation, or the world itself. These are different ways the collective ego survives. Think meta, how your collective group ego is affecting your individual work in the group. Very valuable. Very valuable. Another thing that you need to be aware of is groupthink in group work. Groupthink is when the whole group coalesces on a single vision because there is this push from the whole group going onto one thing, even if the individual members don't want to do that thing. This leads to a phenomenon called pluralistic ignorance, where everyone believes society thinks this one thing is good, and yet individually nobody does. Very trippy how psychology can work like that, or sociology. Ask yourself if your group is falling for this. How is your group surviving its own identity? How are you being influenced in nefarious ways, potentially? Some more problems with group work is too little focus on hearing everyone, and sometimes too much focus on hearing everyone. Goes both ways. Ineffective self-management by group members. Sometimes students think they can't start a task until they've been delegated it or told what to do. Generally, this is less of a problem in the entrepreneurial space because people are inherently self-starters, but a norm you can set with your group is just say, tell the group members, and by doing it yourself, say, I'm going to do X unless told otherwise. Do this if you don't get a good delegation. And then you can start doing stuff, but if someone sees that and they're like, oh, actually, we shouldn't do that, then they'll tell you. It's much better than waiting and wasting a lot of time. It's another problem with collaborative work often is bad task delegation. People don't know what to do at the end of a meeting. It's not discussed as much what next actions are. It's just kind of like invisible, airy-fairy. And sometimes a really helpful question can be paint what done looks like. Because you might be told what the next action is, but the other person might have a completely different idea of what it means. Because their perception of that thing is different than yours. Another issue is no peer accountability grading. I had this in my few of my classes, and I actually really liked it, which is, you ever had that issue where a group member just slacks off, they freeload off all the other group members doing work? One of the ways you can try and navigate this is have peers rate each other at the end on how hard they worked in the project. Now, of course, you need to figure out how to do this in an unbiased or less biased way, but this helps solve the freeloading problem. I've noticed group members work harder in projects where they know there's peer grading. Another issue is no clear meeting agendas or facilitator of any sort. I suggest sending a meeting agenda before the collaborative group session so that people can think about it. And if that's the actual meeting agenda they want to do, discuss the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. Meta meetings. Have a meeting about how to do meetings well with your group. Really meta. Not leveraging members' strengths and weaknesses. Get to know, what are they good at? What are they bad at? Do they want to work on something they're bad at? No celebrations throughout the group work. This is just a meta problem with elite institutions sometimes, is we think celebrating distracts from achievement because we're not achieving while we're celebrating. And yet the celebrating often makes us feel like we've achieved something and feel good about the work we've done, which makes us work harder. Not all the time. We don't want to get caught celebrating too much. But in paradoxical ways, it can actually make you more effective at doing stuff. And then the last major problem of collaborative group work is no reflection after the group work is done on how to do better next time. Again, the process is very important here. If you just look at the outcome of the group work, you're not going to get better at group work over time, because you're going to be doing group work throughout your entire life. So you should probably get good at it now while you're in college. And you need to be reflecting on the group work you just did in order to do that. So those are the 10 golden principles. It only took almost 9 hours in order to venture into them. I want to leave you off on some meta points from this whole 3-part series. Build your knowledge. Knowing is a spiral. Don't let college keep you stuck in the shallower ends of the spiral. If you're a student, as a professor, encourage students to go deeper in the spiral. Knowledge is relationship, not just transfer, not just practicality. Love. Learn to love. Expand your sense of self outward. Don't just care about the world's oppressed. Care about the universe as a whole. Get an existential relationship with your friends. Love them. Love yourself. Become more conscious of the movie of your mind. Build awareness through inquiring, reflecting, and experiencing of what tends to bring you back into the movie and what keeps you in self, the awareness behind everything. Build wisdom. Learn proper valuing, prioritizing, and acting from radical selflessness. Help historically disadvantaged students. Don't just continue the systemic inequities that are already in existence. Become a critical thinker. Holistically think. Systems think. See how you participate in systems and the college system as a whole, how it is a system. And the reason I have to create this video in the first place is because the system doesn't promote what it is that I'm talking about. Foster intrinsic motivation and self-regulation. Learn octalysis, self-determination theory, drive. Grow friendships of character, not just friendships of pleasure and competence. Get more friends like my friend John. Learn how to genuinely learn and teach. Be able to identify bad teachers or bad teaching practices in yourself so that you can be more mindful about what classes you take or how you teach. Self-learn the things that college should be teaching you, but unfortunately isn't. Pursue conscious college accomplishment by building an awareness log and learning to connect accomplishment and spirituality rather than seeing them as separate. Navigate your life purpose, even if it seems like you shouldn't be doing it right now. Prepare for the outside world. Personal branding, general specialization, wage entrapment, AI, all that sort of stuff. Conscious networking. And lastly, build your collaborative skills. As we've just been discussing, understand collective ego and its influence on you, divergence, convergence, how to be a good leader, things like that. In terms of actionalizing this, don't do all of that at the same time. That would be insane. The reason I wanted to put all of this in one is because if you watch this 3-part series, you now have the meta map for what you should be seeking in college. But doing all of them at the same time is a horrible idea. I recommend you focus on one of these principles and ask yourself every day, how can you continue building that? Flow with it. Don't force it. Use your intuition to maybe tell which principle you should focus on the most. If your survival needs aren't met as much as you hope, probably focus on the principles that are more related to your survival needs. If they are, be a little more aspirational. You can still think of spirituality even if your survival needs aren't met, but you might do it more through a practical lens. There is a parable that I wanted to end this video on. Thank you if you've gotten this far. I really appreciate it deeply. It's been a joy recording this whole 3-part series and bringing you through it. And I hope this will only be the start of our journey together, because I'm going to be making way more videos. much more in depth on each of these 10 things and much more outside of that, because there's so much that we could be diving into in college. So, what's that parable? Once there was a student who didn't really know what they were looking for. So they followed the river of learning, thinking that it would lead them to happiness, fulfillment, and making the world a better place. Along the river, they met other students pursuing grades, learning, friendship, accomplishments. And they found others floating idly, chasing laughter, love, late nights under the stars. And so the student tried both achievement and spirituality, but neither stilled the quiet hunger at first beneath the surface. And as they drifted further and further down the river grew wider. They encountered less students. They began to feel lonely. They got caught on more and more obstacles, sticks and rocks and boulders along their way. They clung to rocks and boulders and sticks called certainty and perfectionism and self-doubt, judgment, and on and on and on. And at one point, they started to see the river get bigger and bigger and bigger. They felt that there was some endpoint in mind, the ocean that the river emptied out to. They thought, wow, what is at the end of this ocean? This thing that I've been pursuing this entire time throughout my college journey. What is it that is in the ocean? What is at the end? Is it the happiness, the fulfillment, the better world that I've been looking for? They got closer and closer and closer, and there were less students, and they got very excited. And finally, the river opened up. They reached the mouth, expecting it to be the ocean at the end. And what lay at the end but a paradoxical, strange loop back all the way up, leading them drifting, seemingly up, back the way they came, until they were right in the mouth of the river that they started their entire journey on. And the student laughed because they realized that they had been seeking a destination that never existed. The river was the ocean. The seeker was the flow. College flowed through them, and they flowed through college. The purpose of the journey was never to arrive. It was to realize that they had been in the spiritual flow of the river all along. Thank you so much for making it through this 3-part series. If you want to see more, join my newsletter in the description. It's called Conscious College. Genius name, I know. It helps elite college freshmen and recently tenured professors learn to make a college system that grows their knowledge, love, and accomplishments, just like we've been doing throughout this series. If you sign up, you'll receive a free goodie bag through your email. As always, have a fantastic rest of your day. Eat some peanut butter. And bye-bye.